something that we have ventured into together is anti-racism training. And we usually go through like the wall of history and things like that. And there's a lot of different points in history that we look at in American history where there was acts of racism and acts of resistance. And one of the stories that was told to us was the story of John Punch and James Gregory and how he was, or this was back in like the 1600s, and they were slaves together. There was also another guy, but I mean, there's only two of us.
His name was Victor.
Yeah. But yeah, so we actually decided to write the poem from their perspective because one was an Irishman, right? And the other was a black guy, and they were indentured slaves, not the slavery that of chattel slavery that we know of so much. And so hearing it during those trainings brought that idea back up to us, and we're like, hey, we can like become these characters and make a cool poem out of this.
And although there had been slaves and that mentality may have been present, this is the first documented case of an American who was enslaved for the rest of their life. And so this is the formal introduction on record books of American chattel slavery.
Yeah, and the difference would be indentured servitude would be you're working your time out. You're working out a debt. So you might have a debt, and it might take you 7 years to work it off. So you basically be this person's servant for 7 years or so, and then after you work for 7 years, you can get hired back on by them and get paid a better wage or something like that. Or you can go out and do whatever you want, but you're not a slave for your whole life. So yeah, once John Punch and James Gregory ran away, they told James Gregory, you know what? The punishment for you, they both got 30 lashes. They told James that he gets 3 years added onto his indentured servitude. And then for John Punch, they just said, you have to be a slave for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
I think a reason why we also really wanted to share this was because not that this is just some old thing that happened back in the 1600s, but the concept is still relevant. So the real reason why it became so relevant to us as well is, well, I can't remember the guy's name, but I believe there was one named Brock Turner. He went on trial for raping a woman. And there was a black guy around the same time who also was on trial for raping a woman. And they actually got two completely different sentences for the same crime. They actually told the Brock guy that he got, it was something like 3 months. It was something ridiculous, you know. They really just gave him kind of parole. What it felt like to me, whatever it was, like a little slap on the wrist. And then the other guy, they gave him life in prison. And so, like, that was happening in the 1600s, but it's also happening in the 2000s today. So that lesson of, you know what? These guys, you do the same crime, but you know what? One of you is darker than the other, and darker people tend to get punished harder. And that's been documented and done throughout history of America. So, yeah.
At the end of the poem, we say it's only right that we learn from his story, pointing to each other, and then it's when we write that we learn from history. So I think acknowledging the fact that until we have a unified vision of what our history is, we won't be able to move in any direction as a unified body. So I think part of like growing emotionally as a multicultural church, people, nation, is to have a recognition of what actually happened in the past. And to do that, we need to write stories of people whose stories aren't being written or recognized, especially around race.
I feel like we've gotten pretty good response about it. I mean, I think it's a great debate starter or conversation starter, if you will, where, you know what, you can say, yeah, but why would you say this certain line? I don't know about that, but what we really seek to do is make people like scratch their heads like, is this a real thing? And then hopefully that'll lead them to doing research and learn more. So, yeah.
I think a lot of statements in the poem are reflecting sentiments that I felt or seen in my personal kind of history of coming to terms with, what I grew up in a very racialized world. And the thing of can't we put this behind us, I think is a common sentiment because we have this idea that to get along, that conflict, there's certain types of conflict that you just can't have. And one of them is pulling up past wounds and not moving forwards, and that's been unfortunate. I think conflict to get away from conflict has been a mentality that I grew up around in Grand Rapids with race. And so however you can do that, get away from conflict, end conflict, cover it up somehow. I think we have an unspoken apartheid in how we go about talking about race and acknowledging it for sure. They're just who gets to control the conversation and who gets acknowledged. That's you could use the word apartheid for that.
I think we definitely still have separation, especially even in GR. And there's certain areas that you see it more prevalent in. And I think across America, that is. I heard a pretty high statistic of groups of people that stay together or live in the same area are typically of the same race or ethnic background or pretty close. And it's not, people don't get that much diversity around them. West Michigan, a lot of Dutch. That is what we have. There's a lot of that, and a lot of them are in pockets. And so being in those pockets, you don't get that cross-cultural experience, And I think what King said of that the 10 o'clock hour on Sunday morning is still the most segregated. I think that's still something that we're struggling with and trying to fight. And I think there's a lot of people and groups and ministries that are actually fighting against that and trying to learn what it means to be multicultural, multi-ethnic. And that's also a hard fight as well. So when I find more allies like somebody like Scott, I say he's my brother. And that gives me hope. Finding family that wants to fight in the cause with you. And I was actually thinking about this yesterday. It's really, really tough when you feel like you're going through something alone and nobody else is helping you. And it even feels like a lot of other people around you are actually perpetuating it. But when you find that one person or group of people, that really can help you get through. And I think we find hope in that.
In the Bible, it talks about prisoners of hope. And it's kind of this concept that I like. For people who should, for all purposes, be hopeless based on their circumstances, be a prisoner to hope. And I think to be a prisoner to hope is to really understand what the suffering means to have that hope. And I've seen enough people now suffering for the cause to make that hope be alive, that we can live in a place like Grand Rapids that is radically anti-racist.
It's not even enough to say, no, I'm not racist. It's not. We actually need to find out what can we do to fight against it. Because if you don't fight against it, then you're perpetuating it. And then we would never get the cure.
I think a big question that we first need to ask is, how do we see? And so knowing that when you are seeing correctly, you'll know what to do because you'll be able to see it. And so I think, what do we do? First, figure out, are my optics right? And really take that, for the Christian church, taking that to God. For outside the Christian church, really taking it to whatever power you need to submit to right now to say, change how I view this world. And once your optics change, you'll know exactly what to do for the people and places where you are put in.
Yeah. Definitely. I say seek allies, find out, learn. So I heard educate and advocate and activate, or help be activists. So educate yourself, learn more about it, advocate when somebody is getting undercut or overlooked. That's where you need to be. When you see it, that's where you need to be. We need to advocate for those people and help activate, create other people that can embrace that same concept of educating and activating and advocating. That's where we go from there. That's how you find out what you can do.